Back on MorningLine, thanks for joining us. Khadija Babb's with us. She's a assistant prosecutor with the DA's office here in Davidson County. We're talking about the issue of juvenile crime here in Davidson County. It's a problem everywhere, really, and we see some of it escalating with more serious crimes. If you'd like to join in the conversation, 737-7587. But I just wonder, is there a perception that you feel the public has right now that may be not entirely accurate when it comes to the idea of, these kids are not being held accountable to the degree that they should be? I know there's been here in Davidson County looking at the contrasts between the prior juvenile court judge, Betty Adams Green, and now Judge Sheila Calloway. Both fine, good people, but maybe with a little bit of a different approach. I think some would say that maybe Judge Green was a little more stern. Judge Calloway, maybe in some ways less likely to transfer someone depending on the situation. I think both of them fine compared to some of the crap we've heard coming out of Rutherford County lately, by the way, and we won't get into all that with the judge there. But is there a misconception there? Maybe the public, I think, to some degree thinks, wait a second, kids these days are committing crimes, they're not being held accountable, so what's to keep them from going out and doing it all over again?
I do think that there is a misconception. I think that in general, when people think about crime and accountability, the first thing that we go to is incarceration, right, or detention in the case of youth. But we have to understand that when we're just sending these youth off, whether they're youth or become adults, that they're not getting a lot of rehabilitation services and things when they are incarcerated. And what we also have to understand is that eventually, even some of the youth who get transferred, they're going to come back to our community, right? And so we have to give them the resources to be able to come back to the community and be a positive member of the society. And an additional issue is that sometimes they don't feel a part of the community, so we have to give them the resources to make them feel a part of the community. Like we have a lot of youth that are dealing with some mental health issues, even addiction issues, and those are things that we have to address. So where the public is able to see the age of the youth most of the time, the type of crime that they have been alleged to have committed, they don't know. We don't release the facts of the case. They don't know if this youth has had former child neglect or abuse in their life. So we try to address the trauma and we try to take a holistic approach.
So you're sympathetic and understanding about this. But I mean, to be honest with you, as we sit here listening, I could believe that you're a defense attorney. I mean, you're a public defender for them. And so the idea is to prosecute, but you've said yourself that you don't always agree with what the defense attorneys are saying on behalf of these kids. So I understand where you're coming from. I think it's great that you have that big vision on there. But I mean, do you think, because there are disagreements, that the juveniles in some of these cases are being held accountable the way they should be?
Obviously, I would say if we have a case and I offer the defense attorney DCS custody and we take it to trial and they don't get DCS custody, then in those instances, I am going to disagree with, what the magistrate may have decided. But again, our magistrates, they have these youth, usually if a youth comes into the system, let's say because of a parentage case, right? The magistrates keep that case even if the youth becomes delinquent at some point, okay? So say for instance you have a family that comes in for a neglect abuse and the child is 3 years old, and then later on down the line at 14 this child commits some sort of offense. That same magistrate has had history with that family.
They know that.
And probably understand the dynamics of the family where I wouldn't understand. So at the end of the day, they make the decision that they believe is going to be a good balance between community safety and also just rehabilitation of the child. Are there times that I disagree? Obviously, yes. And I want maybe a kid to go into DCS custody, yes. But ultimately, the magistrate will decide if we're sitting there and we're having a trial.
You said earlier about if there's a violent gun crime and for whatever reason they're not detained, and then they get out and 2 weeks later they do it again, it's automatic. And that's understandable. It's automatic that they'll be detained, or should be, after a second. I mean, come on. I think the issue is then on the lesser crimes, it's kind of like, it's unfortunate, but you see a kid, for whatever reason, that maybe, and there could be a lot of reasons beyond their control, but minor crime, in, out, because they're not being held. They're shoplifting, maybe some vandalism, maybe he punched someone, but it just keeps going in and out. And it's like they're really, how much of those small things before they're really held accountable? Because what's frustrating is, okay, well, they were all small, so we let them back home to their parents who clearly are not doing the job. And then we finally hold them accountable when they kill someone. You saw it coming. Okay, you see it coming when it's time after time after time after time after time. Are they ever held accountable on these lesser crimes? Because you know what's coming down the pike if they don't get some help.
Well, and what I would say is just because there is not a conviction, not a guilty plea in a particular situation doesn't mean that we aren't holding them accountable in some sort of way. So if we, and usually, like I said, we look at the facts of the case, right? So if I have a kid, let's just say they come in for shoplifting at Walmart, then usually I will try to look at the facts of the case. Well, what did they take? Did they take, did they take diapers? Did they take feminine products? Did they take necessities or things like that? And usually, if that is the case, I will try to look into the dependency and neglect history of the child, because why are they stealing things that they actually need? So we might have another case where a kid is just, stealing stuff that they don't necessarily need it, right? Or, things that are arbitrary, that they don't need. We'll look at that, and I may say, okay, well, I will still look at the family background, family history of the child. I will look for the defense attorney to bring me some of that information. I will try to determine what their contacts are in the community, and we may offer them services without getting a conviction, and we may still monitor them for months without actually putting them on supervised probation, because research says the more that they come into contact with the system, the more likely they are going to be adult offenders. So we try to minimize that.
Now, would you think some of the kids these days are savvy enough, whether they're running with older groups that tell them of this, but they're savvy enough to know, I'm under 18, so I can do some of this stuff, and there's only so much they can do to me. I'm just curious, do you run into some where you say, this kid knows the system?
I think that obviously, there's some of that there. Obviously, some of the youth maybe come from families who have had a history of being involved in the system. So for one, it's normal, which sounds insane to say, right? So it's normal, like this is the normal course of business and life for this family. Other times it may just be youth they just don't understand the gravity of the mistakes in that moment a large portion of the time, because even sometimes I'll have them write essays like, why did you do this? And they usually don't give a good enough reason, in my opinion, and I think that they don't sometimes understand the gravity of what they have done in that moment.
Okay, so they don't understand the gravity. Like I said, I've been in there where they kind of give you a blank stare. Now, again, there are some very legitimate reasons why some of these kids come from families that are struggling. It could be a single-parent household, could be the mother or father working very hard, not having it, but you know as well as I do, it's not always the case. I mean, what role and what responsibility do the parents bear for this when you see a kid repeatedly? I mean, because some excuses are legit and some just aren't. They're just lousy parents.
I definitely would say I will have come across some parents that I believe that could do better. Obviously, I'm getting a snapshot of their life in that moment when they're in the courtroom after their child has just been accused of, a crime. And a lot of times I think that as parents especially, we have to hold our children accountable, right? So as much as we want to be mom, especially mom, right? As much as we want to be mom and hold their hand and coddle them and maybe, believe everything that they have told us, we also have to be stern and be in the home, because no matter what, I'm not in the home with them all of the time. Juvenile court's not in the home with them. Probation officers are not in the home with them. So it really does start with the parents. I also feel like the parents have to be willing to seek out resources. And if you start to notice some change in your child, you have to try to dig into that and figure out what's going on, Simply, my mom, if I were, when I were younger, if I were to come home and I was, quiet or didn't say too much, she's just gonna ask, like, what's going on? And I think we have to get back to that. And even as adults, if I see a youth in juvenile court or walking on the street and I tend to engage, just to see what's going on. I think we have to pay more attention to the youth, and they may not be getting the attention they want from their parents. So I think us as a community have to start paying more attention to our youth.
Yeah. When you broke it down for me before about the demographic, are you seeing more young girls getting in trouble? It's still a majority guys, right? It's fine, thanks to testosterone. It's guys that are the vast majority of the folks that go before you in juvenile court, correct?
Right.
I mean, what, 90%?
Yeah. I thought I had the numbers, but I don't. But I would say at least 75%. are going to be men.
Any other trends you see? Are we seeing more young girls? And is it association with gangs? Do you see gangs? Or
I would say, as far as young ladies, I tend to see more like runaway type things with young ladies. You don't really see young ladies involved in gangs. Now, sometimes they may get involved with a young man who is involved in some criminal activity and get in trouble that way. But as far as young ladies being involved in gangs, I don't see it nearly as much as young men.
Okay, that's what I figured. And when you talk about recommending DCS custody,
Yes.
Just to understand that, so if you have, how does that work? DCS would end up maybe taking the child, which would then end up maybe in foster care or something like that, if there's not a situation good at home and you decide not to detain them in the facility.
Okay.
Is that how that works?
So as far as DCS custody, they're going to be two separate tracks, right? I only deal with the delinquency youth, the youth that have been accused of a crime, right? But then you have dependency and neglect youth who go into DCS custody, which is a whole different level of supervision. So as far as the youth that go into DCS custody, let's say I have a youth that has had, was on probation for a handgun, now they have another handgun. I'm probably going to offer them DCS custody at that point because they're not getting it. Once I start to see a youth is not getting it, they're not engaged in probation
it's not happening at home with them.
Right. I'm just like, it's not going to be conducive for them to remain in the home in this
So
time.
then DCS would take them like they would with any other case maybe and then try to place them with a foster family for
well, usually
where do they go?
These kids will go to I don't want to call it a lockdown facility. Well, a lockdown facility. They wouldn't go to a foster home.
Okay.
That would be
would that be like, Woodland Hills isn't around anymore, is it? The facility that, where do you send them? Because I know there's the Juvenile Justice Center, which incarcerates right across from Nissan Stadium.
But, I would say, technically, the Juvenile Justice Center, we don't technically incarcerate or hold youth, right? We only detain them pending a disposition.
And then once it's then where do they go?
But as far as DCS custody, DCS makes the determination of where the youth is going to be placed.
Okay.
So we don't have any control over where the youth is going to be sent. The only thing that the court, and not myself as the DA, but the magistrates have control over when the youth can be released from DCS custody, like when they have completed their program, whether there's a good placement after they completed their program. But once I offer DCS custody and the youth agrees to go into DCS custody in that moment, I usually will only determine whether it's going to be an indeterminate sentence, which basically means there's not a specific length of time that they will be there. Now, for the more egregious crimes, I may offer a DCS commitment until the youth is 19 years old, which basically means if I have a youth that comes in at 17, do I think that they should be transferred to adult court? Maybe not, because they did a serious crime, but they don't have any real history. So I may offer them DCS custody determined until they're 19 years old. But as far as where they're going to be placed, I don't have any control over that. That's completely a DCS determination.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Listen, we'll take a break on that. When we come back, our final segment with you, covering some more ground. Got a lot more questions for you. We'll be back with more and the Assistant DA right after this.
Awesome.